All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Amberly Hendel. I work here on the marketing team at AngelList. We're super excited to have you join us today. For anyone unfamiliar with AngelList, we partner with the venture funds of all sizes and scale to ensure that they have modern software and services necessary to launch, grow, and manage their funds. From fund formation to white glove LP onboarding, capital deployment, and ongoing fund management, we provide end-to-end support from Fund 1 to Fund 4 and beyond. Before I introduce our guest for today, I want to cover two quick housekeeping items. First, Emily has graciously offered her time to participate in a live Q&A towards the end of the conversation. So, your first of many reminders to please submit your questions in the Q&A chat box below anytime during the session. Second, the conversation is being recorded, so we'll be sure to share it with all of you via email following the call. So, with that, let's move on to our guest, who is going to be joining me on screen in just a moment. I'm really excited to be joined today by Emilie Gerber. She is the founder and CEO of 6 Eastern. 6 Eastern is a boutique strategic public relations agency known for its speed, creativity, and deep startup sensibility, essentially capturing the grit and agility of startups it serves. Founded in 2019, it has become a go-to partner for fast-growing tech companies and venture funds, working with over 100 companies ranging from Series A startups to household names like Ramp, Intercom, Nextdoor, and Gumroad. Since the launch of ChatGPT 4, 6 Eastern has carved out a specialty in AI, working with leading companies including Perplexity, Reflection AI, Fireworks, Bolt.new, and Warp. All right. Thank you so much for joining me, Emily. It's good to see you.
Of course, you too.
So, before I officially pass it over to you for your presentation, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and your personal background?
Yeah, happy to. I started my career at Box, the cloud storage company, and I led product communications for them, followed by a few years at Uber, where I worked on PR for the business development team. And then after that, I started my freelance career, which turned into what Six Eastern is today. Spent a few years consulting one-on-one for startups and some VCs during that time. And now we're a 15-person PR agency. And yeah, excited to be here.
I mean, that is incredible growth to going from just a freelance, let's see what happens, to a team of over 15 is pretty impressive. So I'm super excited that you've joined us today. We have some really great folks in the audience who have already submitted great questions. So I know this is a pretty hot topic and something a lot of people are really curious about because
Yeah,
this does tend to be a bit of a black box. So we're excited to have you help us pull back the curtain, learn a little bit more, and see how folks can sort of get engaged themselves. So if you are ready, I'm going to go ahead and share your presentation. I'll hand it over to you and we'll dive right in.
sounds like a plan.
Sounds good. All right. Let me go ahead and share this for us. All right.
Oh, there we go. Cool. Well, yeah, so this is really intended to be a practical guide, meaning very specific tactical things that you can implement on your own or when working with a consultant. I think there's a lot of very high level advice out there, but I love getting into really the nitty gritty of PR. So yeah, we can move on to the next slide. I know Amberly shared some of the companies that we've worked with on the startup side, but we've also done quite a bit of VC work. We've had Excel, Greylock, and Felicis as retainer clients. We've also worked with tons of solo GPs or emerging managers on the launch of their funds and on thought leadership. These are just a couple of the media hits that we've gotten for various VC clients over the years, everything from TechCrunch stories around the launch of a new fund to broadcasts to podcasts. So we'll go into all of that in more detail, but just kind of showing, we've worked with both the big well-known players as well as some of the smaller emerging names. I think the thing we want to really start with is what PR can and can't solve for. It's not a silver bullet. It doesn't help with at every sort of aspect of your marketing. So we'll go into that. Then we'll go into what the current media landscape looks like, which has changed dramatically. You could say over the past 5 years, but really also over the past year, it continues to change. Then we'll talk about like what your story should be when you are doing PR, what reporters are going to find interesting. And I say to startups a lot, this isn't usually the same thing that your customers are going to find interesting. Reporters have different wants and needs. So sometimes there's alignment, but a lot of times you're crafting a brand new story for media. Then we'll talk about how to actually find the right reporters to reach out to, or the right podcast hosts or event organizers, and what that looks like. And I think going a layer deeper than just pitching TechCrunch and pitching the New York Times, which everyone kind of wants to start with. And then last but not least, we'll go into how to conduct outreach, like what to say. And I know there were some questions around this already submitted to what to be saying to reporters, when to reach out, what cadence to reach out. So yeah, those are the main things. And then if folks have questions, we can go into that. We can also go into anyone that wants to kind of workshop a live case study with us if that's of interest. And yeah, let's go from there. Okay, so starting with what PR can help with. I think at a macro level, it's really brand awareness more than anything else. It's very hard to put like a one-to-one relationship between, a PR story that you landed and a new founder that reached out, or an LP. But I think it can help with just general awareness of what you're doing and why you're doing it. So sometimes that can be hard to measure, and I think PR is one of the hardest things to measure overall. And there's kind of a general agreement that that's the case. It's very different from other parts of marketing where you can easily tie metrics to what you're doing. But yeah, top of funnel brand awareness is really the biggest thing. And as part of that, it can kind of help with the next three bullets. So fundraising, attracting interest from LPs. I think when they see, if they're like hearing your perspective on podcasts or reading about you in the news, you can help drum up excitement that way. If you're hiring, or if you're looking to bring on new talent, we see a lot of recruiters, or even myself as a founder, when I reach out, I include a link to a press article or a podcast that I've done, and that can be super helpful. And it kind of just like instantly gives you that check mark of validation that you otherwise wouldn't have, whether or not they actually are paying close attention to what it is. I think having that collateral that's not just your own website can be really helpful. And then the last is attracting founders to the business. I think there are so many media platforms right now targeting founders that as a VC, if you can embed into those and get involved in those, you're actually really able to reach your audience in a super direct way. So I think out of all of these, that's probably the one where it's a little easiest and the most one-to-one, just because of the volume of founder related media opportunities that are out there right now. And yeah, so as part of that, like thinking through what the media landscape looks like today, there are fewer reporters than ever in a lot of ways. And this is specifically true at the mainstream outlets. So like, let's look at TechCrunch, for instance, because I think that's one, we get asked a lot about from founders and from VCs. I think in the last year, most of the reporters that we were working with are no longer there, and there are new reporters coming in, just not at the same rate. Also, what they're covering is very different. If you go to, right now, if you were to go to TechCrunch's homepage, a couple years ago, it would have been funding story after funding story. Now they're really focused on larger trend pieces. Like they're trying to be it's more similar to what you'd see if you're going to like CNBC's tech page or Bloomberg's tech page, where they're really up leveling what they're covering. And I think part of that is, it has directly to do with the fact that the reporters that are at the publications are changing. So yeah, we're really seeing this across the board. Reporters that used to have one thing as their beat now have a much larger sort of focus area. So whereas they might be able to go really deep into one topic in the past, they're now having to spread their time across a lot of different areas. And yeah, I highly recommend, if a certain publication is one you want to get in front of, like really examining what the media landscape and like sort of the reporter landscape looks like at that specific outlet as a way to kind of figure out where they're at. And then the second is there's just more companies competing for coverage than ever before. I think, we're all seeing, the next point is about AI, but we're all seeing just the amount of funding going into the market, the amount of companies that are raising sort of record-breaking rounds, and they're all pitching, and they're going to be pitching the same reporters that VCs are going to be pitching, because really at the end of the day, the reporters that are covering startups are also, generally speaking, the ones covering VC news. Even when you look at a publication like The Information, which really does focus on VC, it's often through the lens of specific companies and startups. So even if there aren't necessarily, more VCs pitching at any given time, you're still competing with all of the other startups. And we regularly talk to reporters that say they're getting 50 pitches a day, 100 pitches a day. And so, yeah, you have to kind of keep that in mind when you're reaching out. And then, yeah, just at a lot of publications, they're taking their general tech reporters, and we're just seeing a lot of them become AI focused reporters. And that's really the area that's getting the most attention, as we all know. But at a lot of publications, the reporters that are focused on AI are really focused on OpenAI, Anthropic, the frontier models, and that leaves like 5% of their attention for everything else that's going on in AI and beyond. So not only is AI dominating news cycles, but it's really like a small handful of the hottest AI companies that are getting most of reporters' attention. And then you look at areas like fintech and crypto and health tech, which used to have their own beat reporters at a lot of pubs. They actually don't any longer. So yeah, I think it partially is following just where the trends are going in VC and startups, but they're indexing, a lot of the areas that maybe still are getting funding are no longer being focused on by reporters. And then last, which is kind of the most promising, I know the first three are kind of more bleak, is that there's all these new media formats that are emerging. And this is really like what we're most excited about as a PR agency, is that we don't need to just pitch the New York Times and Wall Street Journal anymore. I'm actually working on a newsletter right now that talks about all of the top tier journalists that have launched their own Substacks in the past 2 or 3 years. And it's kind of meant to be a comprehensive list of everything. And I think I have 35 on there right now, which is kind of wild. So we all know the obvious ones, like if you follow tech news closely, like Alex Conrad left Forbes to start Upstarts. Newcomer's another popular one. A reporter at The Verge, Alex Heath, just left to start his own newsletter as well. So there's obvious ones, but then there's ones that are less obvious as well. But that really does, in some ways, give more surface area. And I think those are arguably the area where there's the most opportunity to build relationships with reporters, get on their radar, get featured in stories. So that's something that we'll go into more detail on. And then also part of new media is podcasts. Like there are just more podcasts than ever. They're changing all the time. New ones are launching. There are plenty that have the guest format where it's like they're regularly interviewing people. So that's another thing we're really excited about. And with a lot of the companies we work with, both on the VC and the startup side, it's probably about half of our PR program for them in a lot of instances. There's just so much surface area there. And it's also really, there's a lot of conversation around going direct, which, we can talk about later if there are questions about that. But in a way, it is going direct because you're talking directly to, the host, which is then publishing it to their audience. So it's a really lightweight way to not have to necessarily build your own following, but still go direct. So we're huge fans of podcasts. Yeah, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so before going into more specifics on the publications to go after, let's talk about like what makes a good story for any of these. And I think it's like a careful balance, and it's going to be slightly different for every investor. And you kind of want to cherry pick from these different categories, like what you have to say that's interesting in each one. But here are some of the ingredients we look for when chatting with an investor or founder. We dive into their story. Did they grow up somewhere interesting? Did they have like career milestones that are really compelling? Did they work in big tech previously? Did they grow a startup at a really impressive rate? Did they have any challenges that they overcame? Basically anything to like really round out the human piece of the story, because for a lot of the pitching we're doing, it really does come down to that more than the, the fund itself. And I think this is actually probably even more true for VCs than for startups, because it's harder to differentiate, I think, on the narrative side for VCs. A lot of companies or a lot of funds are using all of the same messaging points, being founder first. Like there's a handful that I think get used over and over again. And those can work for like marketing purposes, but pitching media, they're not going to resonate. So like we need to figure out what we can say that's really different. And background is one area that I think it's a little bit easier to do that, especially if you have an untraditional background. The second bucket that we dive into is like really specific wins. So like whether it's returns, whether it's, companies getting acquired, whether it's companies where you invested early hitting really big milestones, like the more specific, the better. And I think, there can be some nerves around getting too specific on things, but we do find when a VC is willing to share that, it's a lot easier to get interest. So yeah, it's important to keep in mind that balance of what you're comfortable sharing and whether it's worth it to get certain press hits. But yeah, I think the more there, the more you can kind of validate that you're worth paying attention to. And obviously, if you're, maybe if it's your first fund, that can be hard, and you're not going to have as much to share at this stage. And so that really will just mean, okay, now I need to lean more into 1, 3, and 4. So that's why I mentioned earlier, like not all of these are going to apply to everyone. The next is like basically the TLDR would be like, what are your hot takes? Like, what can you add to the conversation that others are not saying? And the thing that we push on here is like it really needs to be a hot take. Like a lot of times we ask for hot takes and then it's something that we've seen said time and time again. So and when in doubt, like do your research and see if it's actually being talked about already.
Have
Um,
other people said this?
what's that?
Have other people already said this? It's not a
Right.
hot.
Have other people already said this? Have they, and also if it's a hot take that others haven't said, like, is it going to be interesting to mainstream media or the audience? Like, not every hot, if it's too niche, maybe it won't be, or maybe that's great if it's too niche. Yeah, so like really look into it. One thing that I actually had a founder look at is Allie Garfinkel, who writes Fortune Term Sheet. She does basically like predictions for it's actually going to be coming up probably in a month. Predictions for the following year. And I'm always curious because we submit a million of them, like which ones she actually includes. So like take a look at that and see if yours are on par with the kinds of stuff she's including. And she includes like, and she does a lot of them, like at least 20 or 30. And so actually that's probably like a good easy win. You should stay on top of whether she's soliciting ideas for the predictions for next year and submit some because she's definitely mostly interested in investors and not founders. But anyways, yeah, the spicier the better. And this is like a little hack that I use. If I'm like ruminating on an idea or I have a half-baked idea, like sometimes I'll put it into ChatGPT and I'll be like, make this spicier. Like, what are 10 ways to make this bolder or weirder or less conventional or like say this in a better way? And like I'll just keep brainstorming with ChatGPT and kind of push the limits on what my current ideas are. And you can get some really good stuff that way. Or sometimes I'll even take like a whole like client intake call on thought leadership and then put that in and be like, what's like the coolest stuff that a reporter would find interesting from this? And it's not going to be perfect, but it's good for getting the wheels turning. And then last but not least is like having a unique vantage point. And this kind of ties into number one, which is background, but like what gives you the credibility to have a unique perspective on something that no one else does? Like something that's maybe overlooked by others that you experienced firsthand, or like a signal that people should know about that you came across specifically. Like it's basically like kind of validating like what gives you the authority to talk on a topic that can also be useful to incorporate in a pitch. And again, going back to my point on cherry picking, if you don't have that, but you still have the hot take, run with it. You don't need to have all of these, but if you can tie it to something going on, that's great. But I think generally speaking, you're an investor, so you're going to be looked at as someone that's paying attention. And so that alone, gives you enough to come out with a fresh perspective or a hot take.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you can kind of spend some time thinking through which of these resonate with you, which of these don't. Every pitch is different. And actually just one more point on this is like, you could take all your notes from answering these questions and again, put them in ChatGPT and say, turn this into a three sentence most compelling argument of like why a podcast host should have me on. I'm very big on using AI to like really crisp my pitches. I can be very wordy, but I think being super direct and short is important, which we will also go into later. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so yeah, I probably should have, actually, let's go to the following slide. I want to stick on the topic that I was talking about. Yeah, let's talk about this and then we'll talk about specific targets because it ties in nicely. So yeah, tone, and yeah, I'm just going to say the blanket statement, AI can help with all of these categories. So I'm not going to say for each one how to use AI, but tone, be super human and approachable. Do not sound like jargony or like you're overly selling yourself. Like it should never sound like a marketing email. And I mean, you guys are experienced with like pitching founders. Like I'm sure it's very similar to that. In some ways where, they're not trying to get a sales email from you. They're trying to like talk to another human being. So tone is super important. And I think as at my agency, that's where we really try to differentiate ourselves because a lot of PR agencies send these like really just dry marketing sounding pitches to reporters. And I don't think it works very well. So I push my team pretty hard to lean into human tone. Style, keep it short. The shorter, the better. I heard from some like Another PR person said, like, make every word fight for its life, like to only include the words that actually are going to help sell the opportunity. It's another area where I'm constantly pushing my team. I'm like, yeah, this sentence is technically true, but is it going to help get us this opportunity? And if not, then let's remove it. Yeah, and some of the first time I ever landed 20-minute VC for a client, it was with a 1.5 like it was like a 2 sentence pitch, and it was literally like two or three lines. And he actually replied to Harry, he was like, great pitch. And granted, I had a really good story that I was pitching him on, but that's why I felt like I could keep it short. And I think when you have a really great story, you don't feel the need to oversell it or write a really long note. Um, and then this one's interesting. And okay, location. So where are you reaching out? Email's the obvious one, but as I mentioned earlier, all these folks are getting hundreds of emails a day. We've had a lot of success with LinkedIn outreach, X outreach. Like LinkedIn, I sometimes if I see someone that's relevant that I want to get to know better, add them on LinkedIn. And when you add them, you can send a 300 character message. And I'll just keep it super casual. Like, love the podcast, have some great founders I work with, would love to share some ideas if you're open to it. A sentence or two. And I'm actually shocked at how often I get a reply with, yeah, sure, share your ideas. Whereas if I'm emailing my whole polished long pitch, maybe one out of like 20 or something. So yeah, take advantage of like the other places you can connect. And another thing you can do is looking at your mutual connections with certain folks and asking them for intros. We have a lot of success with this too. If we can't break through with a certain reporter, we'll notice, or we'll take a look at which of their investors have been on that podcast recently or been featured in their interviews. And we'll actually draft a note that our client can send asking for an intro. So like an intro ready note. And that can be great. And so like if you're ever on LinkedIn and you notice someone that you have a great relationship with just did a really cool media opportunity, shoot them a note. And I think a lot of the time they'll be happy to make the intro or the connection when it makes sense. But a warm lead is always like obviously more helpful than if you're reaching out cold, but we're still 80% of the time reaching out cold. And then last but not least is cadence. So this is a part that can be tricky when you're not a PR person. I think it can feel like a little shameless to be like repeatedly reaching out to the same person, but I would say most of the times we get replies, it's on the second or third, or maybe even sometimes the fourth follow-up. And so often we get, I just didn't see this before. So it's just, they're used to it. They're used to it from all the PR people reaching out, getting lots of follow-ups. Obviously, good to wait a couple days in between. I'm also a big fan of like trying to add something new into my follow-up. So not just leaving it at like bumping this or repinging this and instead being like, oh, and I also noticed blah, blah, blah. Or like, oh, I forgot to mention in my first note, this is also something they can talk about. And yeah, it works. So just keep in mind, you're probably not going to get replies from sending one note, but you will if you are willing to send some follow-ups. Okay, let's go back to the finding specific targets. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm not going to focus on the ones that you already know. I'm trying, and maybe, I mean, these are probably also some that you already know, but I tried to lean in heavily towards like the new media formats, because these are honestly the ones that we're working with the most often, for VCs when they don't have hard news. Obviously, when you have a new fund to announce, that's another ballgame, and these probably don't apply quite as much. But in the absence of having something, firm and newsworthy to talk about, this is like kind of a couple that we work with regularly. But some of them like that have really blown up, like TBPN and the Information TV. We have, entire strategies around how we pitch them. But for the rest, or for many of these, like Consumer VC Podcast and Startup Successes and Topline are a couple of examples. That's just from us doing research. It's just from us researching what podcasts other VCs have been on, just doing Google searches, Spotify searches, that sort of thing. We don't have any sort of secret sauce for finding these. It's just from doing our own research. So yeah, and I really suggest, like, Alex Conrad started his own publication, Upstarts. He's super willing to chat with new people right now. He has a new publication. Like, you can really, like with some of the new folks or new media folks, take advantage of the fact that they're building their own brands and use that as an opportunity to be a source for them. He lives in New York. If you live in New York, you can ask to get coffee. There's a good chance he'll say yes. And so I think if you limit too much and you're just going after the tier one traditional media, it's going to be a much more uphill battle. And I highly recommend finding the relevant new media to focus with. This is by far not a comprehensive list. This is literally just a couple that we're working with most recently. And yeah, and I think for most of these, if you were to send them a DM on the right kind of DM on LinkedIn, there's a good shot you'll get a reply. And the other thing to note is that working with new media can help ladder up to the bigger things. Like one time we got a client on Bloomberg TV and we had linked to this pretty small podcast that we had them do. And I think Bloomberg just wanted to hear that person speak to make sure that they were a good speaker and a good fit and compelling. And so if I hadn't had that podcast to link to, we wouldn't have gotten Bloomberg. So don't overlook like, the small part, the small podcast and think that that's not going to be valuable later on. And even if it doesn't have a huge built-in audience, it's basically like free marketing collateral for you. Like you can then go take that startup success podcast and post it on your LinkedIn, post it on your X. Like it gives you a platform that you otherwise wouldn't have, even if, it's not the 20-minute VC of the world. So yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind to like keep it open. And also another way to do your research here is when you're on when you're on LinkedIn, just seeing what people are going on and like maybe you keep like a little reminder or note of like the different things that you've seen. But you don't have to do extensive research. You'll come across this stuff all the time. And if you come across one, you see in recent episode they did, just take a 5 minutes to go shoot the host a note and see what comes of it. Maybe nothing will, but it was pretty low lift.
Yeah. I like the idea of doing as many of these, quote unquote, smaller ones as you can as a way to like build your personal deck, build your personal portfolio. So I think that makes perfect sense, like with the Bloomberg example, that you're just
Yeah.
giving yourself some extra validity. Why should people be listening to you?
Yeah, and like I like if you were to reach at most people, well, I feel like it's going to get inundated if I say this, but like with one like startup successes, if you're to reach out, I think you're going to have a good shot at like a yes. And so just don't. That's one example. You can do more research on others, but yeah, doing a lot of those at least initially
Yeah.
can be
Great.
great. And then you can. I don't think PR needs to necessarily be something you are constantly doing. So if you decide to, take a month where you want to focus on it, that can make a lot of sense and you can get some good wins. And also a lot of these are scheduling really far out. We work with many podcasts right now. In fact, someone on my team just mentioned today, like it's only September and I've gotten 3 notes from podcast hosts that they're booking into next year. So yeah, just keep in mind that it's not all going to be quick wins, but just getting them on the calendar is great.
Yeah.
Um, awesome. So those were the main things that I wanted to share. Happy to, oh wow, we're right at 12:30 too, and I said it would be a half hour. So happy to go into any questions.
Amazing. Yeah, let's take a quick look at what we have here. I know we had some really great questions, both submitted ahead of time and live. So let's kick off with one question that was submitted actually by the founder of Juneco. So they are curious about how fund managers should think about targeting different types of audiences, whether they're, interested in having their piece reach founders versus LPs. Are there any quirks or preferences that you think matter when tailoring your outreach? Maybe it's the actual
Yeah.
message, maybe it's the platform, but curious to see what you think there.
Yeah. So I think there are different publications and podcasts and events you go after if you're trying to target I'm going to assume early stage founders versus LPs. I think it's easier to find the right opportunities to target founders just because I mentioned earlier, there are so many podcasts that aim to give entrepreneurship lessons and advice to that audience. So if I were to reach out to a podcast focused on helping founders, which there are hundreds of them, then you should tailor your pitch not so much to just like a general hot take on investment trend, but it should be here's my advice for founders raising funding. It could even be like here's the 3 things I look for that every founder should have nailed down before they reach out to investors for the first time. So in this case, you'd be thinking through the lens of how can I help a large group of founders that's listening to this podcast. And so it would be very different. It would be very different messaging from if you're talking about your general investment thesis or your hot takes on AI or something along those lines, because the audience is different. And so LPs is a little trickier because there's not necessarily just one profile, but I would think that like the more mainstream pubs maybe are going to attract more of like an LP audience, like maybe maybe you do need to focus more on traditional business press to reach them.
Yeah.
And they're going to care about different things. Like maybe they would care more about like fund performance, and what we talked about like zeroing into like what metrics you can share about the fund and like what companies you invested in that were successful. Like those sort of narratives, I think would work better there. But yeah, I think one's easier than the other. So like if you're trying to achieve both, I think starting with the founder side would be a little more attainable.
Great. And then, sort of staying on the topic of building strategies around the type of messaging you're doing, the next question we have is from Jonathan over at Inbox Ventures. He is curious specifically around the strategies that you would recommend when a GP is interested in promoting specific investment opportunities to those LPs. But
Mhm.
what would your recommendation be in terms of making sure that you're obviously staying compliant with the SEC guide?
Yeah.
There's, pretty strict rules there. So how do you tend to work with your GPs around those guidelines?
Yeah, it's really hard. So we really trust, we tell legal like to basically give us guidance on what we are and aren't
Fair.
able to do. And
Yeah,
we
we should say
cannot,
we're not lawyers here.
right,
Everyone
right, right. And we
legal
could, yeah,
counsel.
and we've had it's funny, we've had investors ask like tell us that they want to do this in a more explicit way. And I've always told them, talk to your legal team first, because I'm
Right.
pretty sure you can't do that. But and so I think you can't, I don't know that there's a direct way to be able to do that. I think really you just have to do all the other things that I've been mentioning, and like that's the best way. That said, and this is a little trickier and more nuanced, but there's definitely leaks to media. I'm sure you've all read stories in the information about funds that are not closed yet, and I think those leaks sometimes can be intentional, meaning the fund wanted it to leak. Not always. This is not like a blanket statement, but usually those happen by off the record conversations, meaning um, you get a reporter in advance to agree to something off the record. And this has to be a mutual agreement in advance. You cannot just say to someone, I'm sharing something off the record or on background, meaning they can mention it, but they can't say who the sources are. That's what on background means. And if it's shared on background or off the record, there's the potential it could leak and end up in the news, but it wouldn't be directly attributed to you. But that's like it's a dangerous game. And I don't want to I don't want to advocate for doing that, but I think it's something that happens for sure. And something anytime you read in the news that, a fund is, that they're talking about a fund and like what the target is, but it hasn't closed yet, that's usually from a leak. And then the last place that leaks happen is like on Telegram and Signal and ways that you can share anonymous tips with folks. A lot of reporters, especially at publications like The Information, have their like Telegram in their bio or their Signal in their bio, and they're looking for tips like that.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we should reiterate, it's most important for this is talk to your lawyer. Make sure we're
Yeah,
staying
yeah.
compliant.
Yeah, the normal way for sure
Very
is
helpful.
just
Yeah.
yeah, the normal way for sure is just going about thought leadership and kind of building the
Yeah.
profile more generally versus anything like sneaky or direct.
Fair. All right. So our next question is another audience question. For managers working with a very limited PR budget, what are the top things that they can be doing or prioritizing to get the biggest impact
Yeah.
possible?
I think if you're willing to dedicate an hour or two a week for like a month or two, you can do all the things that I mentioned in this presentation and get some things like
Yeah.
some wins under the belt. I think if you're going to hire outside, you need to find a consultant that, like, if you're evaluating, first of all, do a consultant, don't do an agency if you're a smaller, unless you're, I mean, yeah, I think you have to be um, at a certain stage for an agency to make sense. So for most, I would say go the consultant route and find a consultant that's definitely worked with quite a few VCs of a similar profile. I think that, and then ask them like what kind of wins they've gotten for their clients in the past. And I think only go that route if you want to really invest in PR beyond, the what I had mentioned before. But I actually think starting on your own can make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it at least gives you a little taste as to what you're capable of, in-house rather than, before you're bringing on somebody
Exactly.
external.
And if you have a second person that you work with that you
Yeah.
can kind of assign things to, like they can I have someone that goes into my LinkedIn and helps me send DM. Like you can kind of have someone ghostwrite for you or reach out for you, or you write the message and then they help you find people to send it to, but there are ways to do it on your own.
Great. And this is actually a perfect transition into our next question. So, as someone just getting started on strategic comms, what are some common mistakes that you're seeing funds make in PR, again, as they're just getting started? And then along those lines, are there any preconditions in place that you would recommend before someone does decide they're ready to make that official
Mm.
investment?
I think the biggest mistake is only going, and this kind of ties to my presentation, but only going after the big guys, the most well-known VC reporters, and putting a lot of energy into that and not seeing results. Also, maybe just putting all your eggs in one basket, like you decide these three reporters are the only ones you want to work with. Like PR is a little bit of a numbers game. And so I think flexibility is super important. I think iterating, if one message is clearly is not landing, try something else. And I think, yeah, like maybe the other mistake I see is being a little too self-promotional and like using a lot of the same, I'm going to call them like tropes that are like every VC fund uses of like what makes them special or unique. But then it's really if everyone's saying the same things make them
Right.
special and unique, then how special and unique is it? And it can be really hard to get out of that because you really might believe and it might be very true that you are like really like living those values and doing things in a way that's like really helpful to founders. But if it's really you need some like proof in the pudding. And so I think those are the things that we see most often. What was the second part of the question?
The second part of the question was, are there any preconditions that you would recommend having in place?
Ah,
So you're ready to make that commitment. What should
yeah,
you have prepared or kind of already set up before you bring on your official like PR, either
yeah.
full time or as a consultant?
So what I'll tell you what we see with clients most often that bring us on is they want to do PR, but then once we start locking in opportunities, they actually don't have that much time to be dedicating to PR. And so I think just recognize, even if you do have a consultant or agency, like assuming they're good at their jobs and they're landing you opportunities, not only are you recording podcasts, you're probably prepping for them. You know, when I did this today, like, I did the presentation last week, then I prepped for an hour this morning, make sure I knew everything I wanted to say. So it's not depending on your style. You're going to need to dedicate some time to doing that. I think some people are great with just being thrown right into the podcast, zero prep, and they're fine. But keep in mind, you're going to need time for that. You're also going to need to dedicate time to like reviewing things that they send over. You're probably going to have to help them with the messaging early on. Depends how self-sufficient the agency or the consultant is. That also there's a lot of varying sort of things there. We try to be like pretty self-sufficient. But yeah, I think the clients that we get the most hung up on are the ones that didn't recognize we're going to need things from them and just don't have the time. So I would do it during a point in the business where you're not just completely slammed with everything else going on.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great suggestion. I have to imagine that's probably a common maybe misconception or like a mismatched expectation is that, you're bringing someone on, they're going to handle everything. You don't really need to get your hands
Yeah,
dirty, but this is still about you. You're the face, you're the one speaking.
exactly. Yeah,
So,
our clients, I mean, our,
ready.
our job is plenty hard, but our clients also have a really hard
Right,
job. Like they're the
exactly.
ones that have to go out and present. And I know, yeah, from doing this sort of stuff, I know how hard it is. And yeah, so it definitely requires not just time, but like mental bandwidth and mental energy.
Yeah. Great. So next we have a question around VCs that are actually outside of SF New York. We have people spread across the country, across the world.
Yeah.
Anything you would recommend that they do differently to maybe stand out
Mm.
as folks that are not in these major hubs?
Yeah, I think one thing is the lucky side is that, or the lucky part of it is that most of the opportunities I mentioned are not in person. And like, I mentioned grabbing coffee with Alex Conrad, but that's more of the exception than the norm.
Right.
90% of the things we set up for our clients are fully remote. So in that way, you don't need to necessarily change your strategy. However, what I would look into is if there happens to be, a reporter or a podcast host or a conference that takes place in your neck of the woods or even in your state, and then using that to your advantage. For instance, I mean, Seattle's still pretty much a tech hub, but we have a Seattle-based podcast host that we work with regularly, and also GeekWire is a Seattle publication. And so we have a client that's actually not headquartered in Seattle, but the founder lives there, and we've taken full advantage of like going after all these Seattle-specific opportunities. So
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
look into it. You'll have to do a little digging and due diligence there. But I think if you can find folks in your neck of the woods that are relevant, they're getting way fewer pitches, I'm sure.
Mhm.
So take advantage of that.
Great. Our next question is actually one that I had jotted down while you were doing your presentation to ask about. So going back to earlier in your presentation, you were talking about how a lot of these journalists are now focusing on AI. There aren't necessarily people whose beat is something besides that. So what perspectives do journalists covering VC care about besides hot
Yeah.
takes on AI? So are there
Yeah.
any other sort of areas that you're seeing picked up that are, not that basically.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, 100%. There, maybe I over like emphasized only AI. There's just more of it.
Right.
There's still general tech journalists. Like at every publication, you can probably find someone that's focused on other areas. Like most publications still have like a cyber reporter. At Business Insider's Malia Russell, who covers VC. The Information has plenty of people that cover VC. Wall Street Journal has an enterprise team. They also have like CIO Journal. Wall Street Journal actually has, they still have like a health tech person as well. So it totally exists. It's just the mind share and so much is being eaten up by AI that it feels very disproportionate. And you might just have to research a little harder to find the non-AI folks. But the same tips would go for non-AI. So like, if you're talking about hot takes for AI, you can still do the same for like health tech. Like there's going to be your list is going to be way shorter. But like Brian at the Wall Street Journal's, the health tech reporter would probably be interested in your POV on, how health tech has changed in the past like year or whatever it may be. And if you can lead with your expertise and why you have something unique to say there, that's great. And actually, one thing I just thought of when I mentioned Brian is it's also can be really helpful if you can mention something that they've written about or talked about in the past in a way that does not. So this is what they're getting every day. Saw your article on X, thought it was great, or like really liked your article on Y. It's way better. I try to instead lead with something that's more like not negative, but like, one thing that I noticed missing from that piece is a conversation around this. And I have a client that actually can talk to you about it, or like something that shows you actually read the article, or like an actual insight into something they said, and not just the boilerplate liked the article. Because I think this little hack has gotten out, and now everyone's doing that. Sorry, that was like a little tangent, but I think it could be really helpful, so I wanted to mention.
Look, this audience will take anything we can get. This is all going to add to some great outreach. Uh,
Yeah.
and I'm sure all of the journalists getting this outreach will thank you with the DMs they're about to get.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's gonna be a lot getting the same same sort of thing. So
But,
I love
uh,
it though. Try to
so
stagger your outreach.
No, you're good. We've had an incredible amount of questions coming in, so thank you again for being here. We have two more that we're going to ask that I think were really strong ones that were submitted. So, sticking on this topic of like these hot takes that you want people to take, that as a reminder,
Mhm.
ChatGPT can help us
Mhm.
finesse. How do you maximize this with execs at like a corporate-backed firm who need to be really thoughtful about what they're commenting on,
Yeah.
specific brands that they're naming. They want to give a hot take, but they can't make it too hot.
Yeah. I mean, generally we usually start with the same level of like spiciness and then just see like, make sure it's run by all the right people. I mean, we work with some of the larger VC funds and like agree there's a level you need to be a little more careful. But I think, if like the GC takes a look and approves and like the people that made the various investments you're mentioning take a look and approve, like we've seen that stuff get through in the past and we're able to use it. If anything, it can kind of just move slower, which sometimes you like miss the opportunity if you move too
Right.
slow. And this goes the same for like our larger clients on the startup side is like it just kind of we can still do the same things. It can just take longer. And so yeah, I think yeah, definitely see that but I think you can still push it and try to get the team aligned. And I think part of it also can help like educating the rest of the team on PR, like and like why it needs to happen at a certain time in order for it to work. Can also like move things along and like what the value of doing it would be.
Yeah, getting that greater buy-in, I think, is really impactful. Uh,
Yeah.
Cool. So I think this last question is actually a great way to wrap it up. So another GP is curious to know what some best practices might be for building and maintaining an effective relationship with your PR firm are
Mm,
once you've already brought them on. So this is
yeah.
hopefully going to be a nice long-term relationship. What are some things they can do in practice to keep it a strong one?
Yeah. So this ties to what I mentioned earlier. One is responsiveness and like willingness to kind of move quickly with them. I think that's super helpful. And if it's, if the GP doesn't have time, maybe there's someone else on the team that you assign to doing that. Like we work all the time with like operations managers, or like if there's one marketing manager, one or chief of staff, even like an EA sometimes, like someone that can field things for us really quickly, I think is really important. I also think you have to have, with PR in particular, you kind of have to come in with a level of trust. A lot of the work is happening behind the scenes. And so if a client asks us to review every pitch and media target we're sending, it's like it kind of signals there's not trust there. And the bigger issue isn't just that, it's that that takes a lot of our time that we're not spending actually doing the pitching. And so if they're not proving themselves, then that's another story, but come in expecting that they're going to do what they need to do, and then you can have a conversation later if the results aren't there. But yeah, I think, trusting that they're giving you the right counsel and that they're, working in your best interest is important, and can feel a little scary because like it can't be measured in the same way other parts of marketing can. And I totally get where clients are coming from when they don't have that trust. But yeah, I think those are big things. And then the last I would say is willingness to build momentum, meaning starting with the smaller things and leading to the bigger things. We see clients that really want to just hyper focus on the bigger things and ignore the smaller things. And I think unless you've already done a lot of small stuff and you're hiring them because you specifically need to get to that next level, if you haven't done the smaller things, like trust that it's going to lead to something larger over time, and let them, kind of get creative with what they're booking you with.
Yeah, fantastic. So the theme here is trust. You're bringing
Yeah,
them on for a reason. You've chosen this firm for a reason.
right.
Trust.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah. And I think, yeah, we see it all the time. Like clients want us to pitch a different story than the one that we think is going to land. It's like, well, you're bringing us on because we can tell you what is going to land. And it's like, you don't need to work with an external PR partner, but if you're going to, you kind of got to go all in.
Fair. No, I think that's great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I think we're ready and at a good spot to wrap for today's discussion.
Cool.
I'm going to
Awesome.
go ahead and pop up on everyone's screen a poll where you can let us know if you're interested in learning more about AngelList's offering for firms. If you check it off, we'll be sure to have our team reach out directly. But once again, thank you so much, Emilie, for
Of
joining us
course.
today. This was an incredible conversation, some really detailed, tactical things that people can take from it, which is always really impactful. So thank you. And thank you again to everyone who joined in to today's conversation. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do so. As we mentioned, we'll be following up with a recording of the event if you'd like to rewatch highlights or share with a colleague. Otherwise, find Emilie on LinkedIn, look up 6 Eastern, reach out to her directly if you have any questions or are interested in working directly with 6 Eastern. And with that, thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.